There's a moment that happened in the royal box at Wimbledon last Sunday that almost nobody was meant to notice. No official statement, no palace press release, just a father quietly making a decision that tells you more about who he's becoming than any formal portrait ever could. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why so many people who were there that day couldn't stop talking about it. Before we go any further, if you enjoy thoughtful royal family analysis and haven't subscribed yet, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you joined us. It only takes a second, and it really helps the channel keep doing what we do. So here's the setup. Wimbledon, July 12th, men's final day, which for this family has become something of a sacred fixture. Kate, as patron of the All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club, has duties to perform. William, as he so often does, brings the children. George is 12 now, Charlotte 11, and if you've watched them grow up on that centre court balcony over the years, you'll know they've gone from fidgety toddlers to genuinely engaged young tennis fans. But this year, something else was working against them. Not an opponent on court, the sun. Temperatures that day pushed toward 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and here's the detail that a lot of people miss when they picture the royal box. It isn't shaded. It sits directly in the sun for long stretches of the afternoon, which on an ordinary summer's day is merely uncomfortable. On a day like this one, it becomes something else entirely. Now, if you've ever wondered why you sometimes see members of the royal box fanning themselves like they've stepped out of a period drama, this is exactly why. According to reports from spectators seated with a direct view of the royal box, there came a point during the match where it simply became too much. The heat, in their words, relayed through their social media updates, had become overwhelming for the family, and that's when Prince William made his move. He didn't wait for an official break, he didn't consult protocol. By several accounts, he simply gathered George and Charlotte and quietly stepped out, leaving Kate behind to continue fulfilling her patron duties, greeting guests, representing the club, doing the job that comes with her role. It's a small thing on paper, a father taking his kids somewhere cooler for a bit, but when you sit with it, it says something quite significant about how this next generation of royal parenting is actually functioning behind the polish.
Because here's the thing about William that people sometimes forget when they're busy analysing balcony appearances and outfit choices. He grew up inside an institution that, for all its ceremony, wasn't always brilliant at reading a room, especially when it came to children. And whatever your view of how his own childhood was handled by the institution around him, it's hard not to notice the contrast here. When his children were visibly struggling, his instinct wasn't to project composure for the cameras, it was to get them out of the sun. Yet something else quietly happened while they were gone. The gap wasn't brief. Based on the same eyewitness reporting, Charlotte returned to the box first, appearing in a video clip looking considerably more comfortable, before she and her mother left again, apparently to track down William and George, who were still missing. By the time play reached the third set, the family still hadn't fully returned. All told, reports suggest they were away for somewhere in the region of an hour, which, if accurate, is no small absence from one of the most watched seats in British sport. Which brings us to perhaps the biggest question in all of this. Why does something so ordinary, a parent removing overheated children from direct sunlight, end up making headlines at all? And I think the honest answer is this. We've spent so many decades watching the royal family perform stillness, wave, smile, sit, applaud, repeat, regardless of circumstance. There's a kind of institutional expectation that discomfort simply isn't shown. So when a senior royal visibly breaks from that script, even for something as unremarkable as taking his kids somewhere shadier, it registers as news because it reveals the human machinery working underneath the ceremonial surface. Consider the historical parallel here for a moment, because it's a genuinely interesting one. Royal watchers with long memories will recall how differently previous generations tended to handle exactly this kind of situation. Children were expected to endure. Stoicism was the entire point. The famous images of young royals standing rigidly through freezing, trooping the colour mornings or sweltering garden parties weren't accidents of circumstance. They reflected a philosophy: appearances first, comfort a distant second. William's quiet decision to simply remove his children from an uncomfortable situation rather than have them grit their teeth through it for the cameras suggests a philosophy that's shifted, whether deliberately or simply instinctively, toward the children's well-being coming first. That doesn't mean the old formality has vanished entirely, of course. The jacket and tie rule stayed firmly in place, heat or no heat, and Kate remained at her post fulfilling her patron responsibilities throughout. Institutions this old don't turn on a dime, and nobody's suggesting Wimbledon is about to relax its dress code because of one warm Sunday. But within those fixed boundaries, there was clearly room for William to exercise some very ordinary parental judgment, and that, arguably, is the more interesting story than any dramatic escape. And this changes the entire conversation, because it also says something about how William and Kate appear to be dividing the emotional and practical labour of royal parenting. Kate, by all accounts, stayed rooted in her official role, presenting a public face of continuity and duty. William, meanwhile, took on the more hands-on, in-the-moment parenting task. It's a division of labour plenty of working parents watching at home would recognise instantly, even if the setting happens to be the royal box at the most famous tennis tournament on earth, rather than, say, a school's sports day. There's also something worth noting about how this story reached the public at all. It wasn't announced by Kensington Palace. It wasn't an official briefing about a royal shift. It's an entirely different way we understand royal life today. A few decades ago, this moment simply wouldn't have been reported.
There was no carefully worded statement about the family's well-being. It came from an ordinary spectator, sharing what she saw in real time on social media. The sort of grassroots, unfiltered reporting that increasingly shapes how these moments are documented. A decade ago, this would have been either undocumented at all, or it would have reached the public only through an official channel, if it reached the public at all. Now, a fan with a phone and a good seat can offer a more candid window into royal life than any press office ever intended to provide. That shift from controlled narrative to crowd-sourced observation is one of the more fascinating undercurrents running through modern royal coverage, and it's worth sitting with for a moment because it isn't going away. Of course, it's worth pausing here and being fair about what we do and don't actually know. We're relying on eyewitness social media accounts rather than an official statement from the palace, so some of the finer details, exactly where the family went, precisely what was said, remain, strictly speaking, unconfirmed. Several commentators have pieced the timeline together from those Instagram updates, and the broader picture is consistent enough to feel credible. But it's the kind of story where healthy skepticism about the smaller specifics is entirely reasonable, even while the larger shape of events, a family struggling with extreme heat and a father stepping in, seems well supported. What happened next, though, is where this story becomes rather sweet rather than simply logistical. When the family eventually returned, George and Charlotte weren't sulking or visibly rattled by the ordeal. Quite the opposite. Reports describe them laughing, enjoying their Wimbledon-branded sun hats, and cheering enthusiastically as their mother took to the court to present the trophy to Jannik Sinner. Charlotte, it seems, had adopted her own double fan system by that point, one battery-operated, one traditional paper fan, a rather charming echo of Camilla's earlier example. George kept his own fan close throughout the remainder of the match, and Kate, in her well-loved L.K. Bennett sun hat, seemed to be managing the heat with the same quiet resilience she's shown across a decade and a half of public life. So, in the end, what actually happened here isn't a scandal or a crisis, or even really a big event by royal standards. It's something smaller and in a way more meaningful. A father read the situation his children were in, made a judgment call that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with basic well-being, and acted on it without waiting for permission or precedent. It's the kind of decision most parents make instinctively a dozen times a summer. The only difference is that this particular parent happens to be the future king of the United Kingdom, and this particular sun umbrella moment happened to unfold in front of thousands of spectators and, eventually, the rest of us. And maybe that's really what makes stories like this resonate the way they do. Not because they reveal anything shocking about the institution, but because they offer a glimpse of ordinary parenting instincts inside an extraordinarily unordinary life.
Whatever else people make of the monarchy's future, its costs, its relevance, its critics and its defenders, there's something quietly reassuring about seeing a father notice his children are struggling and simply deal with it. So here's what I'd genuinely like to know from you. Do moments like this change how you see William as a parent, and by extension, how you see the monarchy's next generation more broadly? Or do you think we read too much into small, ordinary gestures simply because they happen to occur on a very public stage? I'd love to hear your take in the comments below, because this is exactly the kind of conversation this channel exists for. And if you enjoyed spending this time with us, digging into the small human moments behind the headlines, please do consider subscribing. It helps more than you'd think, and it means we get to keep telling these stories together. Thank you, as always, for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.